I love making stuff, and I've been doing it a long time, and I like it more when it gets made. But I find more and more that the way stuff gets made is really accidental and circumstantial, and that things have a life of their own. And I'm going to show 4 projects, most of which you'll recognize, that some of them had almost very little to do with anything I did, but stuff happened anyway. So a man named Robert Hammond was a marketing director at a place called Watchworld, and he came to Pentagram for an identity. And he wanted a retail identity, and I wanted the job because it looked like it was going to pay well. So I sent him a proposal, and I was waiting to hear the result of whether or not he took the proposal or was going to cut the fee when he called me up and he said he wanted to talk to me about something private. And I said, sure. And he asked me if I'd be interested in designing a logo and an identity structure for this abandoned railway called the High Line, which I had never heard of and had no interest in whatsoever. But I wanted the Watchworld job, and I thought if I said no, I wouldn't get the job. So I had to do a logo for him, and I thought, well, let's see, it's a railway. It starts with the letter H. I mean, that can't be that hard. Here it is. He took me up and walked me on it, and I walked along something that looked just like these incredible Joel Sternfeld photos that we ended up using throughout the whole project. It was magical, and while I did fall in love with it, I did need the Watchworld job. So I, figured out that an H and a railroad track were more or less the same thing. And I crafted it, and it looked like this, and it took about, an hour of studio time to do, and I showed it to him. And he said, but we're friends of the High Line. We're the organization that supports the High Line. It really should be an F. Well, I thought, the F wasn't as good as the H. I said, no, you're not the organization that supports the High Line. You are the High Line. The High Line's going to be a real thing. You said it was going to be a real thing. It's going to be a real thing. He said, oh, yeah, okay, and he bought the logo, and I was relieved because I really didn't want to make the F. So we made a bunch of stationery for him, and they started marching around and trying to get people to give money, and at that period of time, they were known as 2 guys, because he had a partner, Joshua David, and they were known as 2 guys and a logo. And they were walking around trying to get support. And during that period, we were designing a book, and this is in the year 2001. We had designed a book called Design for the Public Trust, which was a history of the High Line and where the High Line was and why it would be viable to make it and save it and all that stuff. And some wealthy people signed on. Martha Stewart had just moved into her building, and she gave some money and signed in the book. And a candidate who was running for mayor who had no chance in winning, named Mike Bloomberg, also signed it. And between the time that we made the mechanical and the book was published, 9/11 happened. And then November happened, and nobody ever thought Mike Bloomberg was going to be elected mayor. So we had the mayor's signature on the book, though he wasn't mayor when he signed it. So we pulled the proofs back before it was on press and changed it to Mayor Michael Bloomberg. And this is the page at the bottom where his name is. And that meant that the mayor of New York City had endorsed this project. So the thing actually could begin to be serious about happening, which was amazing. So for the next 10 years, we made lots of what I call crappolla. And crappolla is the stuff you make to sell stuff, to get people interested, to make them think it's real, to make people think something's happening. We made a show in Grand Central called Designing the High Line, which was an open competition, and all kinds of people entered and brought in their own ideas about how the High Line was made, and put on a show in Grand Central. And here people are making wind farms with cows, and there was a swimming pool that took up the whole block. And then the show had some credibility to it because it was actually kind of beautifully staged, and it got a lot of press and media. So afterwards, there was actually some seed money from the city of New York to have a real design competition with some starchitects, amongst them obviously Diller and Scarfidio and Zaha Hadid, and I think it was Herzog de Meuron. And they had a competition, and that over a period of time, the real High Line began to be formed, and we began campaign funds. And here's an early rendering by Diller and Scarfidio, and rendering by James Corner at Field Operation, who designed the landscaping. And we sent this thing out and made a pile of money, launched a campaign on the street with people who had gave money, who had their picture taken in front of the Joel Sternfeld picture, and these things appeared all over the place, and that was sort of a citywide, little area-wide campaign for about 2 or 3 years that sort of lived on the streets. Made millions of party invitations, one after the other, raising money, raising money, raising money, more money, sold postcards, and then finally it was the place. And what's interesting to me about it is that I would say until we actually broke ground, I was never firmly convinced the thing would ever happen. It was like so many things I worked on where it seemed like a good idea, but why would it ultimately get made? It seemed like it was too much money, too much work, why would the city do it? And now it is this sort of iconic thing, the most visited tourist attraction in New York City that seemed to happen in this period of time of us making it. And I'm still kind of actually sitting around waiting for the Watch World job. But I'm glad it's there. And there's Sarah Jessica Parker with a Highline logoed bag, and my favorite New Yorker cartoon with the Highline logo, which is what you want to have happen when your logo is sort of immortalized in the New Yorker. This is a totally different project. I do lots and lots of identities. A lot of them are institutional and cultural. And when I design them, I'm usually confronted with things that look pretty much like this. They're not that bad. This was the Museum of Modern Art before we began to reinstitute an identity program for them. And if you look at these brochures, they look sort of similar and dissimilar at the same time. They all have sort of pieces of artwork on them, but they use the typography totally differently. And if you walk into an institution and you wonder why that happens, is because they're done in different departments. And the departments don't talk to each other, and they're not functioning together as one brand, and you got to make them sit down and behave. I do this all the time, and it's sort of fun and interesting, but generally after I do it, and we sell a new identity, and we give them a fancy manual, the whole thing falls apart when I leave. And the reason it falls apart is that people tend to go back to their own behavior. They don't operate along the lines of the manual because they're interfering and making changes the way they were before they brought me in. So I realized that after years of sort of watching these institutional identities sort of semi-fail or make it, it would be good to operate from a whole other point of view. So what's wrong in most in-house situations is that an organization is sort of structured with a lot of department heads, and they're usually going to one creative service area where there's an art director, and the art director is completely beleaguered with changes going back and forth from all these institutional heads. And they all are operating without talking to each other, and there's no central control. And so you get a diagram of stuff that looks like this, and it makes the mess of the sort of little brochures you saw on the first slide. The goal was to take, and it took nearly a year, to persuade the structure to sort of change, where the central area, which was marketing and design, reported directly to a director, and the other people were talking back and forth to the director, and then down to the art department, and then back up. And what that meant would be there would be less changes and more continuity. We could do this, but what made it even better was to actually staff it. So I sent them one of my former really talented senior art directors named Julia Hoffman, and she got this position. And we were capable of giving the Museum of Modern Art a one-page template that in effect worked for everything, which said, you have a show, promote the show, you have a big picture of some piece of artwork that's going to fit in the grid, you've got a great big logo, and you've got a bunch of disrelated programs that you're promoting on the side. Here's sort of the system of how you promote the disrelated programs. You use the one typeface you already have, which is Franklin Gothic. You increase visibility in New York. You own unrelated programs. And most important, you're consistent. So it means if you're promoting abstract expressionist paintings, or if you're putting them on the street, they can look like they're cohesive, or you can do it with Coen Brothers movies, and it still looks like it all works together. Or you can do it with a bunch of disrelated shows and put it out on the street, and it'll look collectively the same. Or you can put it onto buses, and it doesn't matter what you've got. They're all going to hold and be one thing. And you can put it in subway cars over and over and over again, and in subways and in subway stations and on the street, everywhere you go, and in the newspaper, and his calendar. And Julia Hoffman, from this one-page template, has built stuff that's been continuing for 4 years. And all we had to do it was change the way the reporting worked, and it was absolutely amazing. So sometimes it's not the design, it's really the people. In this situation, my brief was really strange. I was hired to design a logo for a section of town called the Northside in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I was invited by a former client of the Children's Museum where I had done identity and signage. In Pittsburgh, the Northside is a section of town that's on the north side of these sort of railroad tracks and underpasses that break up the city of Pittsburgh. And on the other side is the Warhol Museum, the river, and some cool stuff. And no one ever wants to walk under the underpasses of the train trellis to the north side of town, so the businesses over there don't get as much business as they would. They wanted me to design a logo for a section of town. Now, here are logos for towns. You remember any of these? Really grab, you know, I Heart New York wasn't for New York City, it was for New York State. That was actually an accident. Mostly, these things are disasters. I mean, they really don't look like anything. Do you want that? That's going to make you go to the north side of Pittsburgh? Take a look at it. This is what's making people not go to the north side of Pittsburgh. It's the bridge. So I had to go to Pittsburgh. The way it was set up is I was part of a committee composed of architects and landscape designers and urban planners, and we were going to make a presentation to the city council and to a group of wealthy people in Pittsburgh, movers and shakers for the city. And I was supposed to make the logo, and I didn't make the logo. And I didn't make the logo because they weren't paying me, and I didn't want to do something for free that I thought was dumb. So I got on the plane with something that wasn't a logo, and I was sort of sweating it out as I landed, and I realized, well, what was the worst thing that could happen? I'd just never go back to Pittsburgh, and that would be the... So I got there, and I started to talk to them about logos and why cities don't have logos. What cities have are landmarks. They have places. They have things you talk about and you feel about. And I said, well, you know, people aren't going here because of this stuff, and this stuff is grim. But you can change it by actually doing stuff to it. You could wrap it like Christo, or you could put lights on it, or you could cover it with graffiti and chandeliers at the same time. And they're very quiet. I thought, oh, this is bombing, especially when I got to the graffiti picture. I think I did about 20 of these sort of Photoshop renderings of this stuff. But my proposal was that they take the bridge, that they turn the bridge itself into an art event, that they paint it, they put a kind of wiring and lighting in it that you could house art shows, because in the north side there's an art institution called the Mattress Factory. And the Mattress Factory could actually run it, and they could commission people to install murals and things there, and they could close down the street for a night and have openings, and then all of a sudden it would connect the parts of town, which was sort of the big idea. So I went through this presentation. This was the last image, which sort of hit them over the head with my point. But ironically, this ran on the front page of the Pittsburgh paper the next day, and they've done it. They've refurbished the bridges. They have their first installation up, and it really happened. So sometimes just ignore the brief and go and do it, especially when you're not getting paid. You know, it's Pittsburgh and you have nothing to lose. So those of you who know my work know that in the past 10 years, probably the things I've enjoyed doing the most have been environmental graphics and also my own personal painting of maps. And they're opposite acts. It takes a long time to do both, but environmental graphics is 5 minutes of design and 100 years of installation, and the maps are a million years of a little hand-drawn thing that I do. Here's one of my maps. This is a map of Manhattan. It's got Manhattan zip codes, and it's, you know, completely detailed, and everything's screwed up in it. And this is one of the buildings I did, I think, about 10 years ago in Newark, New Jersey. It was a school for performing arts. I got a call, not as a designer, but as a fine artist, to do a 1% for art mural inside a public school in Queens called Metropolitan High School. It was really 4 schools in one building. And the way the 1% for the Arts Commission works is that they call 3 artists, and the artists are invited down to to demonstrate their idea of what their artwork would be if they won that commission. So it was interesting for me because I functioned so often giving presentations as a designer, and I think in many ways I had an edge because I do this all the time. So what I thought I would like to do, which I'd never done before, was to combine my painting with my environmental graphics, because I thought the notion of actually making a painting for a mural space was rather boring, because the space, and there were really two of them, were atriums, and they were supposed to be inhabited for PTA meetings and special events. And it seemed like just a mural on the wall wasn't enough volume in the space. It wouldn't do what my fear is make boring schools. I always want to take the beige out of schools. So this is one of my environmental graphics for Achievement First. And so, it's a very sort of powerful graphic where the whole building is sort of wrapped in typography. And I really wanted to do that with painting, but I couldn't quite paint anything that big. So I had to figure out how to do it. I made this painting of New York City, which incorporated Queens and Staten Island and all the boroughs of New York, as well as parts of New Jersey and zip codes. And my proposal was to break it up into the structure that was the atrium. And the painting was broken into panels, and the panels were repainted by a sign painter who does my environmental graphics. We made a virtual reality of what the painting would look like when it inhabited this space that has a skylight and a catwalk, and it sort of moves around. And this is just done by scanning, the painting into the computer and sort of manipulating it into its appropriate position. And Queens was on the far wall, right where the school was. There's like a little dot someplace that demonstrated where Metropolitan High School was. And this is the actual painting finished in the real space. So you can see how close it was to the catwalk. Now, if you look very closely, you'll see the seams where the sections of the painting were connected. You see the painting through windows. And the way this thing was done is that the painting itself was projected on the wall and repainted by a sign painter. So you can see me standing with my original painting against the scale of the thing, so you have a sense of how big the thing was. What's interesting about this for me is that I live this straddling balance between design and art. And the way I define the difference is that design has a purpose and art has no purpose. What's interesting about these sorts of environmental commissions that happen from the city of New York is fine artists are put in a position where their art suddenly has a purpose because it actually has to do a specific thing. And there isn't the same kind of involvement and guidance with a fine artist doing that form of installation. So they're sort of running it at cross purposes with buildings, and there isn't the ability to teach the bridge of the two. The city doesn't structure it that way. I find that very interesting in the commission about the way they're separated. So this was truly a hybrid and actually became a little bit of a case study for 1% for the Arts on how they might begin to think about these things, because I could actually really collaborate with the architect as opposed to be kept separate from him because he was so much part of the initial thing. So here we are with the sign papers sort of looking on these are the panels as they were painted. And the thing has texture and depth and really some kind of gorgeous surfaceness. And what was the most exciting thing for me about getting it made was I wasn't sure how it was going to come out. I didn't totally know what I was doing. And now I do, so probably my next one won't be as good, which is always the case. And there were two murals, and this was the second. On the first mural, the school teachers, and this is the design part, the school teachers said, well, we got to read the mural to make sure you don't make any typos because it's going up in a school. And I said, okay, and they made proofread corrections, and I had to correct all these zip codes and spelling mistakes and all the stuff on the painting. The second mural was a painting close-up of Queens, and the mural is painted in 20 languages. I painted in Korean, in Russian, in Arabic, and nobody would translate for me. I couldn't get anybody at the school to do the translation, so I took it off of Google. So then I gave it back to the school, and I said, well, I guess you're going to have to proofread it. And they said, we're not proofreading that, that's art. So that's the difference between art and design. Anyway, here it is. And I want to make more of them. And It's always fun to do what you've never done before, and thank you very much.